Unveiling the global elite's secret history, the shadow government. Hello and welcome back to Driftwood Histories. Throughout our journeys, we have drifted through many hidden currents of time. We have stood in the shadow of Templar fortresses, sat in the secret lodges of the Freemasons, and explored the strange, mythical origins of the Illuminati. We have seen how these brotherhoods, both real and imagined, have shaped our world. But tonight we ask a larger, more unsettling question. Is history truly governed by the events we see, the wars, the elections, the treaties? Or is there another history, a shadow history, that unfolds behind closed doors, in rooms we will never enter, guided by hands we will never see? Is there a hidden architecture of power, a network of secret societies that, for centuries, has been quietly, patiently steering the course of human destiny? This is the ultimate conspiracy theory, the idea of a shadow government, a global elite ruling from the shadows. But is it just a theory? So, find your comfortable place. Let the noise of the world recede. Close your eyes, and allow my voice to be your guide as we explore this grand and often terrifying idea. We will revisit some familiar names and introduce new ones, weaving together a history of hidden power and asking the question: who, if anyone, truly rules the world? Our story begins not with a single society, but with an idea born in the courts of kings and the minds of philosophers. Part 1. The invisible hand from royal courts to global finance. The desire for power is as old as humanity itself. It is the engine of history, the force that builds empires and topples kings. But the desire for hidden power, for influence that operates without a title, without a throne, and without accountability, is a more refined, a more patient, and perhaps a more potent ambition. For centuries, the most effective power has often been the power that is felt but not seen. It is the power of the invisible hand. In the grand, perfumed, and paranoid monarchies of old Europe, this power had a name. It was the power of the eminence grise, the gray eminence. This term was first used to describe a man who was, on the surface, a humble servant of God, but in reality, one of the most powerful and feared men in all of Europe. His name was François Leclerc du Tremblay, but history knows him better as Père Joseph. In the 17th century, the true ruler of France was not King Louis XIII, but his brilliant, ruthless, and powerful chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu. Richelieu was the public face of French power, a prince of the church who wielded the authority of the state. But at his side, always in the shadows, was Père Joseph, a Capuchin friar who dressed in simple, gray robes. He held no official title in the government. He was merely the cardinal's confessor, his private secretary, his spiritual advisor. But in reality, he was Richelieu's chief strategist, his spymaster, and the architect of his complex foreign policy. While Richelieu managed the court, Père Joseph managed a vast, continent-wide network of spies and informants. He quietly directed the course of the brutal 30 Years' War, manipulating alliances, funding Protestant armies to fight against France's Catholic rivals, and ensuring that the interests of the French state were advanced, no matter the cost in blood or treasure. He was the invisible hand that guided the cardinal's will, a man of immense power who sought no personal glory, only the success of his master's vision. This concept of a quiet, unelected advisor wielding immense influence from behind the scenes is the foundational model for our understanding of shadow governance. But as the age of absolute monarchy began to give way to the age of revolution and, most importantly, the age of industrial capitalism, the nature of this invisible hand began to change. It moved from the priest's cloister to the banker's counting house. Power was no longer solely the domain of kings and cardinals. It was becoming the domain of those who controlled money. And no family in history better represents this profound shift than the House of Rothschild. The story of the Rothschilds begins not in a palace, but in the crowded, cramped, and often persecuted confines of the Judengasse, the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, Germany, in the late 18th century. Here, a brilliant and fiercely ambitious money changer and dealer in rare coins named Mayer Amschel Rothschild established a small banking business. He was astute, he was diligent, and he built a reputation for honesty and reliability. But his true genius was not just in finance. It was in his vision for the future. Mayer Amschel had 5 sons, and he had a revolutionary plan. At the time, banking was a largely local or national affair. But Mayer Amschel envisioned a truly international enterprise. Instead of keeping his sons and his business in Frankfurt, he would send them out, like strategic ambassadors, to establish branches of the family bank in the 5 great financial capitals of Europe. His eldest son, Amschel Mayer, remained in Frankfurt to manage the parent house. Salomon was sent to Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg Empire. Karl went to Naples, a key port in the Italian kingdoms. James, the youngest, was sent to Paris, the cultural and financial rival to London. And his third son, the most brilliant and aggressive of them all, Nathan Mayer Rothschild, was sent to London, the undisputed center of global finance. They were not just 5 separate banks. They were a single, unified international entity, bound by the unbreakable ties of family loyalty. And they had a secret weapon: information. They established their own private, highly efficient courier network of ships, agents, and carrier pigeons that could carry financial and political intelligence across Europe faster than any government or rival bank. In an age before the telegraph, information was the most valuable commodity of all, and the Rothschilds had the fastest network for acquiring it. Their rise to dominance was cemented during the Napoleonic Wars. They became the bankers to kings, to governments, and to armies. They skillfully navigated the complex and shifting alliances of the era, often financing both sides of a conflict. They became masters of government bonds, lending vast sums to nations to fund their war efforts. Their most legendary and perhaps most mythologized moment came in June of 1815, with the Battle of Waterloo. The fate of Europe hung in the balance. If Napoleon won, the value of British government bonds would plummet. If the Duke of Wellington won, they would soar. The financial markets in London were paralyzed with uncertainty. According to the legend, Nathan Rothschild, the head of the London branch, had positioned an agent near the battlefield. As soon as the outcome was clear, a decisive victory for Wellington, the agent raced to the coast, crossed the English Channel in a storm, and delivered the news to Nathan in London. He had received the information a full 24 hours before the British government's own official courier. Nathan went to the London Stock Exchange. He did not immediately start buying. Instead, he stood in his usual place and began to sell. The market, seeing the great Rothschild selling, assumed he had received word that Napoleon had won. Panic ensued. Everyone began to sell, and the value of British bonds crashed. Then, just before the market closed, Nathan and his agents secretly bought up a massive position in the now dirt-cheap government bonds. The next day, when the official news of Wellington's victory arrived, the value of the bonds skyrocketed, and Nathan Rothschild made a fortune of unimaginable size. While some details of the story may be embellished, the core truth is undeniable. The Rothschilds, through their superior information network and their brilliant financial acumen, had become the dominant financial power in Europe. For the next century, they were not just bankers. They were, in many ways, a sovereign power in their own right. They were the sixth great power of Europe. They financed wars, but they also financed peace. They funded massive infrastructure projects like the new railway systems that were crisscrossing the continent. It was Rothschild money that allowed the British government to purchase the crucial shares in the Suez Canal, giving them control over the vital waterway to India. They provided loans to the Pope, to the emperors of Austria and Russia, and to the government of Brazil. Their influence was profound and often deeply resented. To many, they were a stabilizing force, the brokers of peace, because a stable, peaceful Europe was good for business. But to a growing number of critics, nationalists, and conspiracy theorists, they were the embodiment of a new kind of shadow government. A secret, international cabal of Jewish financiers who were not loyal to any single nation, but only to their own family and their own profit. They were accused of manipulating markets, instigating wars, and controlling the world's money supply from behind the scenes. This laid the groundwork for the toxic anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that would plague the centuries to come, including the infamous and fraudulent text, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. The House of Rothschild was not a formal secret society with mystical rituals and secret oaths, but they operated with a level of secrecy, coordination, and familial loyalty that surpassed any traditional order. They were the first true Bilderberg Group, a private, international network that wielded immense and often unaccountable power over the affairs of nations. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, this model of influence of powerful, private individuals meeting in secret to shape public policy began to be formalized and institutionalized. And it found its home, not in a single dynastic family, but in a new kind of organization, the elite policy group, or what we now call the think tank. One of the earliest and most influential of these was born from the mind of the great British imperialist and diamond magnate Cecil Rhodes. Rhodes, a man who made a vast fortune in the diamond and gold mines of South Africa, was a fervent and unapologetic believer in the destiny of what he called the Anglo-Saxon race. He dreamed of a world unified and governed by the benevolent, and in his view, superior influence of the English-speaking peoples. He envisioned a secret society that would work patiently over generations to bring about a political union between Great Britain, its dominions, and the United States, creating a global empire of peace and prosperity. In his early wills, he laid out a plan for a secret society of the elect, which would be the hidden hand guiding this new world order. While this grand, formal secret society may never have come to fruition exactly as he planned, his vision did inspire the creation of the Round Table movement in the early 20th century. This was a network of influential figures in Britain and its colonies, including Lord Alfred Milner, who advocated for closer imperial union. After the devastation of World War I, this group recognized that the old model of empire was no longer viable. They shifted their focus to a new model of international cooperation, led by Britain and the United States. And from this shift, two of the most influential policy groups of the 20th century were born. In Britain, it led to the founding of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, more commonly known as Chatham House. In the United States, its counterpart was the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, founded in 1921 with funding from prominent bankers like J.P. Morgan and the Rockefeller family. The CFR, based in a quiet mansion on Park Avenue in New York, became the single most influential private foreign policy organization in American history. Its membership was, and remains, a who's who of the American establishment. It includes former presidents, secretaries of state like Henry Kissinger and Hillary Clinton, CIA directors, Wall Street bankers, university presidents, and media executives. Its private meetings, its study groups, and its influential journal Foreign Affairs have shaped the course of American foreign policy for an entire century, from the Cold War to the War on Terror. To critics, the CFR is the public face of America's deep state or permanent establishment. It is a place where the true, bipartisan consensus on foreign policy is forged, far from the chaotic and unpredictable world of democratic politics. It is, they argue, the American branch of the shadow government. These institutions, from the secretive courts of 17th-century kings, to the international banking houses of the Rothschilds, to the quiet, influential policy rooms of the Council on Foreign Relations, represent the long and complex evolution of hidden power. They show how the invisible hand has shifted its form from the individual advisor to the dynastic family and finally to the institutionalized network of the modern elite. Part 2. The Ideological Engineers' Secret Societies of Belief. Power does not operate in a vacuum. It requires a foundation, a story, an ideology to justify its existence and to direct its aims. The most effective power is not the one that rules by brute force alone, but the one that captures the hearts and minds of the people. And throughout history, secret and semi-secret societies have often been the hidden laboratories where these powerful ideologies are born, refined, and prepared for the world. They are the ideological engineers, working patiently in the shadows to shape not just policies, but the very way we think. We have already, in a previous journey, explored the historical Bavarian Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt. Though it lasted for less than a decade in the late 18th century, its dream was perhaps the most radical of all. It sought to use a secret, hierarchical society of intellectuals to infiltrate the institutions of the state and the church, to dismantle all existing religions and governments from within, and to replace them with a new world order based purely on secular reason and enlightenment. It failed, but its ghost, as we have seen, has haunted the world ever since, becoming the ultimate symbol of a secret, world-changing conspiracy. The Illuminati represents the archetype of a secret society dedicated to radical, top-down ideological revolution. But while the Illuminati were working on the radical left of the political spectrum, other societies were working on the extreme right. In the early 20th century, in the chaotic aftermath of World War I, we saw the rise of the Thule Society in Germany. This was a secret society that blended German nationalism with a twisted, racist form of occultism. It was in the drawing rooms of the Thule Society that the myth of the Aryan master race, the symbol of the swastika, and the paranoid fantasy of a global Jewish conspiracy were nurtured and given an esoteric, pseudo-intellectual veneer. As we have explored, it was the ideological cradle of the Nazi Party, a chilling and tragic example of how a small, secret group can plant the poisonous ideological seeds that can grow into a genocide. But the engineering of ideology is not always so overt or so violent. Sometimes it is far more subtle, more patient, and perhaps more effective. Consider the Fabian Society, founded in London in 1884. This was a very different kind of secret society, dedicated to a very different kind of revolution. The Fabians were not bomb-throwing anarchists or armed revolutionaries. They were intellectuals, writers, academics, and civil servants. Their most prominent members included the brilliant playwright George Bernard Shaw, the visionary science fiction author H.G. Wells, and the formidable intellectual and political power couple, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Their goal was the same as the more radical Marxists, the eventual establishment of a socialist state. But their method was completely different. They named their society after the Roman general Fabius Cunctator, known as the Delayer, who had defeated the great Hannibal not through decisive, pitched battles, but through a slow, patient strategy of attrition, of wearing his opponent down over time. This was to be the Fabian method, gradualism. Their strategy was one of permeation. They sought to influence society and achieve their socialist goals not through a violent, overnight revolution, but through a slow, patient, and deliberate evolution. They would join the major political parties, particularly the nascent Labour Party, and steer them from within. They would work their way into the civil service, the government bureaucracies, and the education system. They would found influential institutions, most famously the London School of Economics, LSE, in 1895, which would go on to train generations of future world leaders, civil servants, and economists. And they would write. They produced a constant stream of influential pamphlets, books, and articles, all designed to chip away at the intellectual foundations of capitalism and to make the case for a socialist, collectivist future. Their symbol, which they adopted in their early years, was a startlingly honest one. A wolf in sheep's clothing. It was a candid depiction of their strategy. To be a hidden, guiding force, gently nudging society towards their desired destination, often without society even realizing it was being led. The Fabians believed in a technocratic, expertly managed society, a form of socialism from above, where enlightened experts would plan and manage the economy and the state for the good of all. Critics, then and now, have seen them as a form of slow-motion conspiracy, a patient, century-long project to erode the principles of free market capitalism and individual liberty in favor of a powerful, centralized, and collectivist state. The Fabian society represents a different kind of hidden power, not the power of a single coup or a violent uprising, but the quiet, persistent power of institutional and ideological influence, played out over generations. On the other side of the ideological spectrum, we find a more modern and equally influential counterpart, the Mont Pelerin Society. If the Fabians were the intellectual engineers of 20th century social democracy, the Mont Pelerin Society were the intellectual engineers of the free market counter-revolution. The society was founded in 1947, in the aftermath of World War II. Its founder was the brilliant Austrian economist and political philosopher, Friedrich Hayek. Hayek had watched with horror the rise of totalitarianism in Europe, in both its fascist and communist forms. He had also become deeply concerned by the growing acceptance in the West of Keynesian economics, central planning, and the expansion of the welfare state. He believed that these collectivist trends, however well-intentioned, were a road to serfdom, a path that would inevitably lead to the loss of individual liberty and economic freedom. Feeling that the classical liberal and free market ideas he cherished were on the verge of extinction, Hayek convened a meeting of like-minded thinkers. They gathered at a Swiss mountain resort called Mont Pelerin. This founding group was a small but formidable collection of economists, historians, and philosophers, including future Nobel laureates like Milton Friedman and George Stigler, and the influential philosopher of science Karl Popper. The Mont Pelerin Society was not a secret society in the traditional ritualistic sense, but it was, for a long time, a very private and highly exclusive intellectual network. Its goal was to create an intellectual ark, a place where the ideas of individual liberty, free markets, and limited government could be preserved, debated, and refined. They saw themselves as fighting a long-term ideological war against the prevailing collectivist consensus. For decades, they worked in relative obscurity, primarily in university departments and a growing network of free market think tanks. They wrote books, published academic papers, and taught a new generation of students. They were patient. They were playing the long game. They were waiting for the political and economic climate to change, for the post-war consensus on the welfare state to begin to crack. And in the 1970s, it did. The decade was marked by economic stagnation, high inflation stagflation, and a growing sense that the old Keynesian solutions were no longer working. Suddenly, the ideas that had been nurtured for decades by the Mont Pelerin Society were no longer on the fringe. They were seen as a viable alternative. Their ideas laid the intellectual groundwork for the rise of a new generation of conservative and libertarian leaders in the 1980s, most famously Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom and Ronald Reagan in the United States. The neoliberal revolution that swept the globe with its emphasis on privatization of state-owned industries, deregulation of financial markets, tax cuts, and free trade, was a direct result of the patient, decades-long ideological work of the members of the Mont Pelerin Society. They had won the war of ideas. These societies, the Radical Illuminati, the Racist Thule Society, the Gradualist Fabians, and the Free Market Mont Pelerin Society show us that the battle for the future is, very often, a battle of philosophies. They are the secret, or at least semi-secret, orders that work to engineer the very common sense of an era. They prove that to truly change the world, you must first change the ideas that govern it. They are a powerful reminder that the most powerful hidden hand is often the one that holds the pen. Part 3. The Modern Constellation Power, Secrecy, and the Global Network. So where does this long, winding history of hidden power leave us today, in our hyper-connected, yet deeply fragmented, 21st century world? Do secret societies still rule from the shadows? The old, formal secret societies, with their elaborate rituals, their mystical symbols, and their secret oaths, may have faded in direct political influence. The Freemasons, once a powerful network for revolutionary and Enlightenment ideals, are now, for the most part, a social and charitable club, their public image more associated with community service than with clandestine influence. Skull and Bones, while still a potent alumni network that places its members at the highest levels of American society, is perhaps not the all-powerful, centralized shadow government it once appeared to be. But the model of secret, or at least private, elite gatherings has not faded. In fact, it has become more institutionalized, more sophisticated, and more global than ever. The true shadow government of our time, if such a thing exists, is not a single mystical society with a secret handshake. It is a constellation of interconnected and often overlapping elite groups, private forums, and exclusive policy networks that work to shape the consensus of the powerful. We have already explored the Bilderberg Group, the annual, completely off-the-record meeting of the North Atlantic political, financial, and corporate elite. For over 70 years, it has served as a private, unaccountable forum where the most influential figures in the Western world can have candid discussions, build personal relationships, and forge a common understanding of global problems, far from the prying eyes of the public. But Bilderberg is just one star in this larger constellation. Consider the Trilateral Commission. It was founded in 1973 by the American banker and philanthropist David Rockefeller, along with the influential political scientist Zbigniew Brzezinski. At the time, there was a growing sense that the world's power structure was shifting. The old, post-war Atlantic alliance between North America and Western Europe was no longer sufficient to manage global affairs. A new economic power was rising in the East, Japan. The goal of the Trilateral Commission was to foster closer cooperation between these three major economic power centers of the developed world: North America, Western Europe, and Japan. Its membership, like Bilderberg's, is by invitation only and is a carefully curated list of high-level politicians, corporate CEOs, banking titans, and academics. Its critics see it as another key instrument of the globalist elite, a group working to create a unified, global economic system managed by a technocratic, unelected class. The fact that future U.S. President Jimmy Carter was a member before his election only fueled these suspicions. And then there is the most public, yet in some ways most exclusive, gathering of them all: the World Economic Forum, WEF, the annual meeting held in the luxurious, snow-covered Swiss mountain resort of Davos. Davos is not, on the surface, a secret meeting. It is a massive media spectacle. Journalists from around the world flock to cover the public speeches and panel discussions. But the real business of Davos, as everyone knows, happens behind the closed doors of private chalets, in exclusive cocktail parties, and during off-the-record meetings. Here, the world's billionaires, the heads of the largest corporations, prime ministers, presidents, and tech moguls mingle, make deals, and discuss the future of global capitalism. It is at Davos that new global agendas are often launched. In recent years, the WEF has championed a concept known as the Great Reset, an idea proposed by its founder, Klaus Schwab. On its face, it is a call to rebuild the global economy after the COVID-19 pandemic in a more sustainable and equitable way. But to a new generation of online conspiracy theorists, the phrase Great Reset has become a powerful new boogeyman. They see it as a thinly veiled code word for a sinister plot by the global elite to dismantle capitalism, abolish private property, and impose a new, authoritarian one-world socialist government. The WEF's own slogan, "You'll own nothing, and you'll be happy," intended as a provocation about a future of subscription-based services, was seized upon as proof of this dystopian plan. What connects all of these groups from the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group to the Trilateral Commission and the World Economic Forum is a shared culture and a shared worldview. It is the culture of the global elite, a class of people that has been dubbed Davos Man. Davos Man is a term coined by the political scientist Samuel P. Huntington to describe a new kind of global citizen, a member of an international elite who has more in common with their counterparts in other countries than with the ordinary citizens of their own nation. They share a common language, the language of global finance, of policy acronyms, of management theory. They share a common belief in the benefits of global markets, in the power of international institutions, and in technocratic, expert-led solutions to the world's most complex problems. This is the new, modern face of hidden power. It is less about mystical rituals and ancient bloodlines, and more about policy papers and private consensus building. It is less about secret oaths sworn in a candlelit crypt, and more about off-the-record conversations over cocktails in a Swiss ski resort. The conspiracy, if there is one, is not a secret plot hatched in a single smoke-filled room. It is the emergent property of a deeply interconnected and largely unaccountable global network. It is a network that has its own culture, its own language, and its own interests, which do not always align with the interests of ordinary people in a democracy. The old, romantic myths of the Illuminati controlling the world, of the Templars guarding the Grail persist because they provide a simple, powerful, and deeply human story to explain this complex and often opaque reality. It is easier, and perhaps more satisfying, to imagine a small group of evil men plotting in a room than it is to understand the vast, impersonal, and systemic forces of global finance and institutional power. The truth is that power has always sought secrecy, and secrecy has always, and will always, breed suspicion. The societies and groups we have explored in our journey tonight, from the warrior monks of the Knights Templar to the modern-day Davos man, are a testament to this enduring dynamic. They are a reminder that the world is often governed by two sets of rules, the ones we are told about in our civics classes, and the ones that are decided in private. They are the hidden architecture of history, the quiet, powerful currents that flow beneath the surface, shaping the world in ways we can feel, but rarely ever see. Conclusion: the enduring allure of the hidden hand. The channel's main theme music gently fades back in, swelling to a conclusive, contemplative finish. And so our journey through the history of hidden power, through the veiled corridors and secret rooms of the world, comes to its conclusion. We have drifted from the courts of 17th-century kings to the international banking houses of the Rothschilds, from the ideological laboratories of philosophers and social engineers to the modern, global forums of the elite. We began our story with the invisible hand, tracing the evolution of hidden influence. We saw how the power of the Eminence Gryce, the quiet advisor like Francis Père Joseph, who shaped the 30 Years' War from the shadows, was a precursor to a new kind of power. We then followed the rise of the House of Rothschild, a family dynasty that, through its private intelligence network and financial genius, became a sixth great power of Europe, financing wars, propping up governments, and demonstrating that control of capital could be more powerful than control of armies. We saw this model institutionalized in the 20th century with the founding of elite policy groups like the Royal Institute of International Affairs in London and, most notably, the Council on Foreign Relations (CFR) in New York, which has shaped American foreign policy for a century. Then, our journey took us into the world of the ideological engineers. We explored the secret societies that sought not just to influence events, but to change the very ideas that govern our world. We revisited the ghosts of the Bavarian Illuminati, with their radical dream of a new world order based on secular reason. We touched upon the dark, mystical nationalism of the Thule Society, which provided the poisonous ideological soil for the Nazi Party. We saw the patient, gradualist strategy of the Fabian Society in Britain, with its symbol of a wolf in sheep's clothing, as they worked for a century to permeate society with socialist ideals. And we met their free market counterparts, the Mont Pelerin Society, an intellectual arc founded by Friedrich Hayek that preserved and refined the ideas that would fuel the Thatcherite and Reaganite revolutions of the 1980s. And finally, we explored the modern constellation of power. We saw how the model of private, elite gatherings has evolved into a global network of interconnected groups. We peered through the tightly guarded doors of the Bilderberg Group, the off-the-record meeting of the North Atlantic elite. We examined the Trilateral Commission, created to foster cooperation between North America, Europe, and Japan. And we stood in the snows of Davos, at the World Economic Forum, a place where the world's billionaires and political leaders gather to set the global agenda, sparking new conspiracy theories like the Great Reset. So, what are we to make of this long and often unsettling history? Is there a single, all-powerful secret society, a grand, unified conspiracy that has been directing the course of human events for centuries? The evidence, when examined closely, suggests that the idea of a single, monolithic, and ancient cabal is most likely a myth. A powerful and compelling myth, but a myth nonetheless. The reality is something more complex, more fragmented, and perhaps more human. It is a world of competing networks, of shifting alliances, of shared ideologies, and of the undeniable systemic influence that comes from concentrating immense wealth and power in the hands of a select few. The stories of these secret societies are not just about them. They are, in a profound way, about us. They reflect our deep-seated and understandable anxieties about power, our suspicion of authority, and our enduring desire to find a simple, understandable pattern in a chaotic and often unjust world. The Hidden Hand is a story we tell ourselves to make sense of forces that feel far beyond our control. It is easier to imagine a small group of evil men plotting in a room than it is to understand the vast, impersonal, and often invisible forces of global finance, institutional momentum, and ideological drift. But that does not mean that hidden power is not real. It is very real. It simply doesn't wear a hood or use a secret handshake. It wears a bespoke suit. It sits on corporate boards and the boards of foundations. It funds think tanks and university departments. And it meets for off-the-record conversations in luxurious, secluded hotels. The conspiracy, if there is one, is not a formal plot. It is a conspiracy of shared interest of a common culture. It is the quiet consensus built among a class of people who have more in common with each other, regardless of their nationality, than they do with the citizens they are meant to lead. The real secret is that the people who run the world, for the most part, know each other. They go to the same schools, they sit on the same boards, and they gather once a year in the mountains of Switzerland or at a resort in Virginia to talk about the future. Our future, the enduring allure of the hidden hand, the power of these stories, lies in this fundamental truth. It is a story about the veil between the governed and the governors, between the public stage and the private room. and it reminds us that the history we are taught is often only half the story. Thank you for joining me on this voyage with Driftwood Histories. If these stories have stirred your curiosity and soothed your mind, I invite you to subscribe and join our community of fellow travelers. There are many more hidden currents of time, many more secret histories, for us to explore together. Until then, sleep well, question the world, but do not let its shadows consume your peace. May your dreams be your own, and may you always seek the light, both in the world and within yourself. Good night.